Hexblast is actually a one-button build when you set it up right. And in this case, I'm playing a Raider with Pathfinder Proliferation Forbidden Jewels, but this could just be a Pathfinder. It's a build that's got somewhere between 10 and 35 million DPS, depending on whether or not you use Vault Breach. It's got really great clear. It can clear entire screens with Proliferation with a single click, although it is really silent. And it's the opposite of what you normally see with Hexblast. Explosions, a big boom. Instead, this is really quiet, fast, evasive, but I think gets the job done much better. The core concept behind this build is to stack the low tolerance notable on medium cluster jewels, and also use Alchemist's Mark, which basically doubles my poison DPS for one single gigantic poison hit. Now with the Pathfinder node for poison proliferation, you're able to solve all your clear issues, and with the Raider actual ascendancy, I'm able to get a lot of suppression, cast speed, attack speed, movement speed, permaphasing, all the good things that come with Raider. There's a couple other things I'm doing on this build to scale my damage pretty high, but ultimately the biggest thing is to stack a bunch of cluster jewels. It's a build I think is really great as a mapper, and obviously I do have the damage you can see here, but it's ultimately capped out at the top because of the damage over time cap. Now, because of how coding for damage over time works in PoE, you basically can never actually do more than 35 million DPS. Hypothetically, if I was able to actually leverage the Vol Breach Poison Prolift combo on bosses, I could probably reach around 500 million to about a billion DPS, depending on how many mobs there were. Even despite the cap, I think it's a build that's still, all content viable. I've struggled a little bit when I'm doing my Ubers on this build. I've ultimately done all of them eventually, but it lacks a lot of recovery. I think it's a build that's really good for you if you like smooth clear, really great boss damage, and ultimately don't mind engaging with 30 separate trays to buy all the jewels that you need for this build. So yeah, there's a lot of jewels I'm running for this build. I don't need to run actually this many if I went for Pathfinder, and I could drop these forbidden jewels, but I kind of chose Raider because I ran out of Regret Orbs on my character and didn't feel like, respecing my whole thing. Anyways, the core idea is to stack a bunch of these medium clusters with low tolerance and something else. So I have Septic Spells on a couple of them. I have Circling Oblivion on others, just to increase my poison duration. And that pretty much gives you all your damage in the build. I've written the custom config in for this because PoB doesn't actually calculate it. In addition, I'm doing some other things. So firstly, I'm using a Skin of the Lords with Doomsday. This isn't actually mandatory, because Doomsday is 1, 2, 3 intelligence nodes away. You can just, path over there and grab it. This skin was like 30 chaos, so I just bought it. I'm using a diadem for Withering Step, not super important. This wand was like, 5 divines. I do have some really good gear on here, but ultimately if you stripped away all the really high-end gear, I think you'd end up with about, 5 million DPS, and then you'd still have pretty good damage if you use Vault Breach. Otherwise, you're still hitting that 35 million DPS poison cap, roughly. Ralakesh is probably the only really expensive item that I'm using. Ralakesh's Impatience is giving me Frenzy Charge Generation, which is really good because it scales Alessia's Delight, which gives me 8% more damage over time. 8% more damage over time dealt per Frenzy or converted into Affliction Charge. Now, the cool thing about this interaction with Ralakesh and Alessia's, which doesn't actually matter, but it's cool nonetheless, is that when you move with Ralakesh, normally you'd lose all your charges, but you actually only lose Frenzy, Endurance, and Power charges. So even though I gain min Frenzy charges, which become min Affliction charges, when I move, I actually don't lose those Affliction charges, and it makes my Frenzy charge generation really consistent. And the inclusion of Ralakesh is one of the big reasons why I think this might just be better as a Pathfinder, but I don't really care. Otherwise, you're looking for things like this, plus Doom Amulet, plus skills, really powerful, and then, Essence Crafted Rings with, I think this is Delirium for damage over time multi. The jewel setup, yes, I'm using a lot of voices, but I'm using 5 passive voices. These are like, 10, 20, 30 chaos. They are not great, and if I was using like 1p, 3p voices, obviously this becomes much more efficient. Important thing to remember, and I say the most important thing, is to remember to grab Whispers of Doom. This lets me go double curse. So one of my curses is Alchemist's Mark, and you can see that Alchemist's Mark is actually making a Caustic Ground DPS. And this roughly, almost, doubles my damage over time, even more actually, because it's got a base duration of 4 seconds, so that Caustic Ground actually lasts for longer than my poisons. It leads to really good damage uptime. But Doomsday is really important, not just because of that, but it also lets me run Despair in addition to that, and that actually gives me the Doom generation to scale Hexblast's damage, the sort of 15% more damage with ailments per 5 Doom on the Hex with the most Doom. You need to grab this node, or you have to get +1 curse from elsewhere. In any case, it's hyper efficient and a really powerful node just to grab. I actually go for Faster Poison. Faster Poison does scale Alchemist Mark's damage, although you do want some poison duration. If I had one more poison cluster, I would consider taking the 20% poison duration and mastery, but I just don't really have space for it. Otherwise, I'm running things like Determination, Grace, Defiance Banner. I'm also running Purity of Elements just because there aren't really other good auras to run. This could be Malevolence, and I could just, not Divine Blessing Malevolence, but ultimately Purity of Elements is, not a horrible aura to run. I don't mind running it. I don't really think it's great, but there just aren't a lot of really good options for this build, I think. Some interesting things. The Glaive Implicit is capping out my poison chance, and this Watcher's Eye is capping out my evade chance so that I'm basically at 95% evade cap on all my encounters. I'm not actually suppression capped on this build, basically because I got lazy with gearing, and it's led to me dying randomly by one-shots to Ubers. I think if you get your suppression to 100%, which isn't actually hard to do, again, I have almost no suppression on gear. All you need to do is get suppression on your shield, and you'd already be there. It's sort of still a meme build at the end. Again, all content viable, but when you have this much time investment into a build, I just don't think it's super great. But it could be really fun for certain people who want to experience this playstyle. I do think this is way, way, way better than the Profane Bloom Blasphemy setup for Occultist. Poison Proliferation is really great. So unlike Ignite Proliferation support, the Poison Proliferation from Pathfinder for Master Toxis kind of works more like Barracks Respite, which is more like a smooth spread and doesn't leave ground degens that then sort of proliferate. Master Toxicist, I think, actually has really fantastic clear. The more you juice your maps, the more powerful your clear is. So yeah, not a super optimized build in the end, but I think a template that other people could work with. Doesn't really need to be scaled any further to clear the entire game. But if you really want to, I'm sure you can make this into something better.